Yeah, Chevy coming in, Merc coming into the pit lane then as well. So everybody coming in. So medium tyres for Chevy, medium tyres for BMW, hard.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I got into this situation. At risk of sounding braggadocious, I am very good at racing games. Cherry-picked example though this may be, this here is me claiming pole position in a lobby full of A+ rated drivers on Gran Turismo 7. However, I've always consistently been half a second to a second a lap too slow to be a serious esports challenger. This didn't stop me from trying, however, and the Manufacturers' Cup format in particular gave me the opportunity to pull a little sneaky. For those unfamiliar with Gran Turismo E-Sports, it all starts online where you race against drivers of a similar skill rating within your own region. In championship races, you score points based on your finishing position multiplied by the strength of the fields. There are multiple time slots per round. You can enter as many as you like, but only your last attempt counts as your round score. For this season, there were a total of 6 rounds, with the best 3 round scores counting for your final tally. Now for the Nations Cup, there were no further complications. It was simply the highest eligible scores in each region that would advance. For the manufacturers, however, first you had to have the highest score out of anyone in your region using the same brand as you. If you accomplish that, congratulations. Now your manufacturer has to be in the top 12 of the global ranking. And this was determined by a complex system that I cannot describe in a timely fashion, but the simple way of putting it is that the combined strength for the brands across all 3 regions would determine which 12 were represented in the live event. As such, one way to qualify if you're not amongst the best in the world would be to select a brand that has relatively weak direct competition in your own region, but is strong in the other 2 regions, ensuring that their global rank will be high enough. And as the day approached for round 1, I realised that BMW could be exactly that in the Asia-Oceania block. So I went and picked it and got off to a strong start actually. I went on to win this race that I previously mentioned taking pole in and got 314 points for it. Fast forward to the end of the season and BMW had achieved exactly what I was hoping for. A strong showing in Europe in particular, securing 10th in the global rankings. Unfortunately, I was only 2nd in the BMW rankings for my region. You see, my big results were not coming in what we call top split. I was in 2nd split, and whenever I did get a chance to race in top split, I was not fast enough to get results. Veltro, on the other hand, was fast enough to race these big boys, and Fuss was getting a lot more points. So that was that. Obviously I wasn't going to qualify in the Nations Cup either, so no live event for Yuki Kadaka, aka Veltro, had more important things to deal with in late July that year, but someone still had to be Asia's representative for BMW at the showdown, so me, being 2nd on the list, got the call up. This resulted in a mad scramble to prepare myself for Austria on numerous fronts, the first being my passport situation. I had lost my previous passport and would have replaced it sooner if I thought there was a realistic chance of going overseas, but I didn't. But then it turns out I could go overseas, so I had to scramble to get a new one, and the process of proving you are who you say you are in this country could be an entire video in its own right, but long story short, I managed to get my passport just in time for Follophony Digital to work things out on their end. My second challenge was to relearn how to drive all over again. See, I play all of my racing games on a controller, but the live events have not permitted controllers since late 2018, and even if they did, my 2 teammates were wheel users and we would have to share an input device anyway. So I spent the next 2 weeks trying to learn on a G29, and to my credit, I think I managed it. My best time in the private time trial was not egregiously off the pace, and my race simulations were also getting decent by the time I had to head out to Austria. Well, to be more precise, Germany, and from there we'd all receive a shuttle bus to Austria later. In retrospect, it's a good thing this wasn't a direct flight for me, as economy class seating is really cramped, especially when you get the window seat on a 12.5-hour flight where the aisle is taken up by a family who also has a baby with them, so it would be rude to have asked them to stand up just for my sake, and I also couldn't stand up in place because the luggage compartment was over me. Anyway, I was the first to arrive. The only thing I was first at all trip, really. I needed sleep after a flight like that, but unfortunately, check-in at the Hilton wasn't until 2 PM. Luckily, the organisers did have one room to spare for early arrivals to borrow. I met up with Guy Barbara and Jonathan Wong, and they let me have the bed, to which I was like, I'm Di, thank you forever. For dinner that night, I chose to sit at the same table as Igor Fraga because it's rare that you get to interact with someone who beat an F1 driver in equal machinery. Really happy to see that Fraga's back in real life racing this year. Dude deserves it. Moving on to the 29th, and in what was perhaps an omen of things to come, our shuttle bus got detoured through the village side, and what was supposed to be a 2-hour trip actually took 3 hours. But eventually we did arrive in Austria, home of overpriced energy drink and gay Phoenix idols. As a side note, I had brought my PS3 with me in the hopes of organising a local party using the older GT games as well as other titles. But the schedule was too packed once we got into Austria, so none of us got a chance to do that, sadly. Which brings me to the 30th, which was an all-day affair for us Manu Cup participants, even though we only had one 90-minute race to do. But this is where the imposter syndrome set in for me. I didn't qualify on merit. Yuki should have been there, and I was getting stressed out by the thought of having to race in front of thousands of people online on an input device that I still wasn't entirely comfortable on. This most notably led to my outburst in the driver briefing because we were only getting 1 hour of official practice to be split amongst all 3 drivers and no additional allowance for controller users. I could have handled myself a lot better, however, so I apologise to everyone who was there. Let's move on to qualifying. Unbelievable lap from Eric Cassie. Even though it looks like he hits the wall on the last turn and shakes his head over it, he ends up putting the car second on a 47.6. But then, this happened.
Right here, then you can just see minimal steering inputs there, and there's a problem for BMW, and there's contact. What on earth has happened here? I think there might have just been a...
Internet issues on a local area network? Are you kidding me, PD? We finally got going again almost an hour later, and Cassie was doing well at first, but it became clear that our BMW was not a very good race car. The tyre wear was mediocre, and we had possibly the worst fuel consumption on the grid. But I know that doesn't completely excuse my performance in this race. I've got to admit that I drove a really slow stint, about a second a lap slower than what I was capable of back at home. In fairness, the pressure of being on stage makes everyone slower. The benchmark in the private time trial was 46s, yet the pole time was a 47. By the end of my stint, however, I had resigned myself to letting everyone through so that I didn't ruin anyone else's race in the process of ruining my own team's. We were saved the indignity of finishing last by Porsche having technical issues, but it was nonetheless a very unfun final stint for Randall Haywood, so I understand why he was upset with me, and I do apologise to him. But what I didn't think was acceptable was certain members of the greater community being particularly mean-spirited towards me. One in particular said that I would have been better off testing positive for COVID, which means they were either wishing sickness upon me or asking me to blatantly cheat for what exactly, because even if you take a full half a minute off of BMW's race time, that's still only just enough for them to finish 7th. The good news was that the race was over, and as slow as I was, I hadn't done anything egregious to embarrass myself like spin the car around or run into anyone else. I could enjoy the rest of my trip to Austria and, in the process, enjoy one of the best virtual races I've seen in the Nations Cup Grand Final. Lots of different strategies in this one. It was difficult to predict the winner for most of the race. I thought Cockabum was going to take it, but he didn't quite have the pace in the end. Whilst I still plan to compete in future online seasons on GT7, I think it's for the best that I no longer seriously attempt to qualify for the World Tour. Save that for the more experienced racing wheel users, so that when they get there, they don't look like a fish out of water.
As Team BMW on that medium tyre are going backwards, it seems, not able to turn that medium tyre on at the moment.